Hello, I'm Sebastian. Welcome to 9 Trees podcast. Today, I will summarize and review the book. A Theory of Socialism and Capitalism by Hans-Hermann Hoppe is a tightly argued work of political economy that compares two broad ways of organizing society: systems based on collective control and systems grounded in private property and voluntary exchange. Hoppe, associated with the Austrian school and libertarian thought, approaches the subject less as a historical survey and more as a conceptual analysis of what different property rules imply for incentives, conflict, production, and social cooperation. The book examines why disputes over resources arise, how various institutional arrangements attempt to manage them, and what costs follow from those arrangements. It also connects economic outcomes to moral and legal principles, asking which rules can be defended as just and which tend to generate systematic inefficiency or instability. Readers encounter critiques of egalitarian redistribution, public ownership, and state intervention, alongside a defense of strong property rights and market coordination. The result is a provocative framework for evaluating policy claims about fairness, prosperity, and social order. I will give you key takeaways from this book. Firstly, property rights as the foundation of social order. Hoppe treats property rights as the basic rules that determine who may control scarce resources and under what conditions. Scarcity forces choices, and choices create potential conflict whenever more than one person wants to use the same resource. In this framework, social systems differ primarily by how they assign and enforce control rights. Capitalism is characterized by private ownership acquired through original appropriation, production, exchange, and voluntary transfer, whereas socialist arrangements expand non-owners' claims through collective ownership or compulsory redistribution. The central claim is that clearly defined and enforceable property titles reduce conflict by establishing predictable boundaries and responsibility. When ownership is stable, people can plan, invest, and trade, and they bear the benefits and costs of their decisions. Hoppe emphasizes that rules are not merely economic tools, but also normative commitments about what counts as legitimate control. By focusing on property as a precondition of rational calculation, cooperation, and accountability, the book frames policy debates about taxation, regulation, and public goods as disputes over ownership rather than technical management problems. This lens encourages the reader to ask what incentive structure a rule creates and whether it aligns decision-making authority with the consequences of decisions. Secondly, why socialism weakens incentives and economic calculation. A major theme is that socialist institutions, broadly understood as restrictions on private property or expansions of collective claims, systematically weaken the link between effort, stewardship, and reward. If individuals cannot securely own and exchange resources, they have less reason to invest in maintenance, innovation, and long-term planning. Hoppe builds on the Austrian critique that rational economic calculation depends on market prices formed through voluntary exchange of privately owned capital goods. Without genuine ownership and trade, price signals become distorted or absent, making it difficult to compare alternative production plans or allocate resources to their most valued uses. Even partial interventions can push decision-makers to rely on political criteria rather than consumer demand, shifting competition from serving buyers to lobbying authorities. The book also stresses that when benefits can be captured without bearing full costs, behavior changes toward short-term extraction, overuse, and rent-seeking. This is presented not as a claim about personal virtue, but as a predictable institutional effect. By tracing how different degrees of socialization alter information flows and incentives, Hoppe offers readers a way to evaluate why centrally directed systems tend to struggle with efficiency, quality, and adaptation under changing conditions. Thirdly, redistribution, egalitarianism, and the dynamics of conflict. Hoppe argues that schemes aimed at enforcing equality through compulsory redistribution create new and persistent sources of social conflict. If income and wealth are continuously adjusted by political mechanisms, individuals have incentives to fight over the rules, the categories used to justify transfers, and the control of the institutions that administer them. Instead of resolving disputes, redistribution can institutionalize them by making access to coercive power a primary route to gain. The book challenges the idea that equality can be defined and implemented without arbitrary judgments, since people differ in preferences, abilities, and choices over time. Attempts to equalize outcomes must therefore override voluntary arrangements and personal responsibility, which can erode trust and reduce cooperation. Hoppe also explores how redistribution affects time preference and capital formation. When returns on saving and investment are taxed or diluted, present consumption is favored over long-term accumulation. The broader implication is that egalitarian policies can reduce growth while simultaneously expanding political competition for privileges. By analyzing redistribution as a property rights problem, the book invites readers to consider not only the intended compassion behind transfers, but also the structural incentives that may increase polarization, dependency, and hostility between groups. Fourthly, the state, monopoly of coercion, and institutional incentives. The book treats the state as a territorial monopoly of ultimate decision-making in disputes, backed by taxation and enforcement. Hoppe focuses on how monopoly control changes incentives compared to competitive provision. Because the state can fund itself through compulsory levies and can set rules for its own operation, it is less constrained by consumer choice and profit and loss feedback. This can lead to systematic expansion of regulation, spending, and administrative discretion. Hoppe also links interventionism to moral hazard. When losses can be shifted to taxpayers and political blame can be diffused, risk-taking and inefficiency are more likely. Another theme is that legal rules created by a monopolist may drift toward protecting the institution itself and its clients, rather than consistently protecting property and contract. This analysis does not depend on assuming bad intentions, it relies on the predictable behavior of organizations insulated from competition. For the reader, the takeaway is a diagnostic framework. Examine whether a policy increases discretionary power, reduces personal liability, or weakens the ability of individuals to exit. If it does, Hoppe suggests it likely amplifies long-run governance costs and social friction. Lastly, a libertarian defense of capitalism as cooperation through contract, Hoppe presents capitalism as a system of social cooperation in which peaceful interaction is coordinated through ownership, exchange, and contract. The moral argument centers on the legitimacy of self-ownership and the acquisition of external resources through voluntary means, which together provide a principled boundary against aggression. Economically, markets are portrayed as discovery processes that harness dispersed knowledge, allowing individuals to signal priorities through prices and to specialize according to comparative advantage. The book emphasizes that under private property, decision-makers internalize costs and benefits more fully, encouraging stewardship, innovation, and mutually beneficial trade. It also argues that voluntary charity and community norms can address hardship without institutionalizing coercive redistribution. While critics may dispute some conclusions, the work offers a coherent perspective that links ethics, law, and economics into one framework. Readers are encouraged to evaluate capitalism not as a guarantee of perfect outcomes, but as a rule-based order that minimizes conflict over scarce resources and creates conditions for rising living standards. The topic concludes with the idea that defending capitalism requires defending the underlying property rules, not merely praising growth statistics. In conclusion, this book best serves readers who want a principled, theory-driven comparison of socialism and capitalism rather than a purely historical narrative. Students of political philosophy, economics, law, and public policy will find it useful, as will entrepreneurs and engaged citizens who want to understand why arguments about markets often hinge on deeper assumptions about ownership and legitimacy. The practical benefit is a sharper ability to analyze policies in terms of incentives, information, and conflict. When you can identify who controls resources, who pays, and who decides, you can better predict unintended consequences. Hoppe also offers a unified lens that connects moral claims about rights with economic claims about prosperity, helping readers test whether their ethical intuitions align with the institutional outcomes they want. Compared with many similar books, it stands out for its tight focus on property rights as the core variable and for its integration of Austrian economic reasoning with normative theory. Even if you disagree with parts of the argument, the clarity and rigor make it a worthwhile purchase because it equips you to engage competing viewpoints with more precision and to evaluate real-world proposals beyond slogans about fairness or efficiency. If you would like to support Hans-Hermann Hoppe, you can buy the book through the Amazon link I've provided in the podcast description. After reading the book, please let me know what you think and share your thoughts. See you around.